care about clean water, then this matters to you. If you care about wildlife, whether it's threatened or endangered species, then you should care about this issue.
There's so many grows, we have to prioritize which ones we investigate and to get the drug off the forest.
The volunteers get an opportunity to see all this garbage out there, and most of the time they don't know anything about it.
We find anywhere from 4 sleeping bags to 20 sleeping bags sometimes. Or we've had them pull a knife on the canine and stab the canines.
They've got cities they're building basically, so sometimes they're pretty extensive.
Avoid detection, they hide it under the brush. Sometimes they trim the brush a lot and we can see that change in the landscape from the air.
What amazes me is the engineering. So the amount of infrastructure that is being brought in, it's just amazing how much damage and destruction is occurring.
A lot of people believe marijuana is a harmless, even life-enhancing natural substance with little or no negative impact on our health or environment. And we need to look no further than our national forest to see the negative effects marijuana cultivation is having on our natural resources. The environmental problems associated with marijuana cultivation have long been a problem. However, the negative effects have only recently been well documented. Dr. Gabriel's current research concentrates on the vast environmental impacts marijuana cultivation is having on our unique natural resources of the western United States. Dr. Murad Gabriel is the co-director of the non-governmental scientific research organization headquartered in northwestern California. He is also associated with Humboldt State University and the University of California, Davis. I'm Chris Wolf, and welcome to the National Marijuana Initiative. We are in California at the Sierra National Forest, where Dr. Gabriel is briefing members of the National Guard, the Forest Service, and the High Sierra Volunteer Trail Crew on today's mission. We're about to hike into the forest to a marijuana grow site that Dr. Gabriel and the team will be cleaning up. Today's group consists of 2 to 3 dozen people, which is typical of the effort needed to reclaim these sites. The cost of today's reclamation project will be tens of thousands of dollars and does not include remediating the land, an even more intensive and expensive process. Dr. Gabriel has been studying the problem of illegal marijuana cultivation on California's public land since 2004. When he began trying to solve the mystery of why members of a rare species called the Pacific fisher were being found poisoned to death. Dr. Gabriel determined their source of death to be exposure to rodenticides spread by illegal marijuana growers. The fisher is a member of the weasel family that lives in remote parts of North America. Due to its small, isolated populations, they are considered vulnerable, and the chemicals used by marijuana cultivators pose a significant threat to the species. Members of international drug trafficking organizations take advantage of the remoteness of the forest to live and work undetected at their grow sites for months at a time. They clear parts of the forest to establish marijuana cultivation and processing areas, as well as their living and sleeping areas.
You see right here, this is one of the cameras we put up.
Right.
So that's a camera that we put up to get this trail. What we're trying to document is all the wildlife coming in.
These trails make it easier for wildlife to travel to parts of the forest they might not otherwise visit. The increase in the animals' ranges also makes them more likely to come into contact with marijuana grow sites and the hazardous chemicals spread around them. Dr. Gabriel documented a 233% increase in wildlife poisonings between 2009 and 2014.
This camera's been out here, I believe, since January of this year. And so that's just, we're going to keep them out here for about a year or possibly more, just to monitor what wildlife comes in before grow sites clean up, and then how they dissipate and don't venture in here again after cleanup.
So this is a site right up ahead?
The site's coming up here, so what they typically do is they thin out the manzanita, they come in, but you can see this trail system.
Right.
This isn't something where someone's walked it 2 or 3 people in 1 day or 2 days. This is multiple years, and this trail system, the next grow of the complex goes all the way to that other side of that ridge line.
How did you guys find this site?
Well, law enforcement found it through their interdiction efforts. So they find it, They go ahead and run the operations to do the eradication, and we assist them to kind of do the environmental assessment and then bring in, our team, but then work with the local teams here, like the other NGOs. So High Sierra Volunteer Trails Crew has usually been the component, the lead here in the Southern Sierras to clean up sites over here.
This looks like ground zero where these cultivators live. So tell us, what are we looking at here?
That's a flat bench. Cookware, you have some onions that are regrowth since last year. You've got coffee, Pepsi cans, you have cooking utensils. This is where they prepared their food. No more than a couple feet away from a carbofuran. You have all of their clothing and other types of material. You have toothbrushes here, a cook stove. You've got propane tanks. Right behind you is their tent area.
This is where they sleep?
They sleep. And I believe we found 4 sleeping bags here, so this is probably about a 4-man crew. There's a trash pile right over there, but they usually throw the trash down, and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind.
I hear a waterfall in the distance, so talk a little bit about the irrigation system that these cultivators use, because we also see tremendous amounts of tubing. How does that work?
There's 2 creeks that come in here. Just to give you the lay of the land, these 2 creeks come in and they go into the San Joaquin River that goes down to the San Joaquin Valley that feeds a lot of either agriculture and also salmonid, so salmon and anadromous fish-bearing streams. But there's also a lot of grows around here that also flow into a local lake where people recreate. Now what happens, what the cultivators do, they put irrigation pipe, and you can clearly see some of this irrigation pipe that's 1-inch tubing, and they'll go ahead and tap it into that creek, build up the velocity by gravitational feeds, and so it'll just come in, build up velocity, swing it up from the creek, and then it pulses into this grow and then charges all of these lines.
I see all these little capillaries running off the bigger lines, correct?
Yep, that's a spaghetti tubing that comes in and they cap in, and each one will have an emitter. The emitters would be 1/4 to upwards of a 1/2 gallon per hour. So if there's thousands of plants, 1/2 gallon per hour, we're talking 24 hours a day. For the growing season, these cultivators don't pull out the pipe at the end of the day. They keep them in there year round. So that's 365 days a year, 24 hours of 1/2 gallon per hour.
Millions of gallons.
Millions of gallons a site could easily be poaching from our public lands. That's only one site. They detect only 350 to 450 sites a year in California. That's probably an estimated 20 to 50% of all the sites that are occurring in California. Times millions of gallons of water theft per site, that's billions, if not several billions of gallons of water being poached from our public lands just to feed this plant.
These growers use illegal pesticides and rodenticides brought in from outside the United States and are pouring thousands of gallons of these chemicals onto our public land. Dr. Gabriel and Dr. Greta Wengert are going to tell us about these chemicals and how to safely dispose of them. Dr. Wengert is also the co-founder and co-director of the Integral Ecology Research Center, and her research has focused on the environmental impacts from trespass marijuana cultivation. Dr. Gabriel, we've just come across a grow site here that's been reclaimed. It looks like we've got pesticide here. Can you talk about what we've found here?
So what Dr. Wengert's going to pick up is actually an unknown pesticide, but it has been confirmed as carbofuran now after additional ancillary testing. But you can see it's a Gatorade bottle, which poses a risk not to the environment, but also to human health, because literally anybody can come in here right now, see this and see, oh, it looks like a milky white substance in a Gatorade bottle, open it up, and then that's going to pose a health risk to individuals.
What are we looking at here?
So as we were talking about earlier, there was that repurposed bottle of carbofuran.
Right.
What this was a full bottle of carbofuran at one point, and you can clearly see additional puncture wounds in there. Bear in mind that this material right here, it takes about 1/4 of a teaspoon to kill a 600-pound male African lion. So 1/8 of a teaspoon can kill easily a 300-pound North American black bear.
These chemical bottles are found all over illegal marijuana cultivation sites and are not only dangerous to the environment but pose a significant human health risk. With the chemicals left lying around, anyone could stumble upon them and be exposed. In 2016, national parks and forests were visited by more than 500 million people. Hiking is one of the most popular activities in these recreation areas, and there have been reports of park rangers and members of the public being threatened by armed growers after unintentionally getting too close to their grow sites.
What this is, unless you speak Spanish or can read Spanish, it'd be very difficult to find out what this is, because this has Spanish labeling, which means that number one is a violation of federal law and state law, because this is not manufactured or for any distribution in the United States. But this material, which is carbofuran, is also currently illegal for any use within the United States, Canada, or the European Union due to its high toxicity.
Dr. Wenger, you're about to mitigate this toxic material and get rid of it?
Correct. We're going to place it into the bucket. It's an airtight bucket, which will sequester it away from causing any more damage, and then appropriately dispose of it.
This sprayer, we'd taken a sprayer swab sample of this previously, and this came back positive for carbofuran, which is that illegal for use substance and material. But that 1 liter is not supposed to be used in a 2-gallon sprayer. That 1 liter is supposed to be used for 3,000 gallons.
The overuse of these toxins is not an accident. The growers intentionally use more than necessary in order to keep away any wildlife that may harm their crops.
What we see and document out there is most likely just a fraction of the amount of deaths that are normally occurring, because what happens, what we suspect, is an animal gets exposed, consumes a lethal dose, and then most likely because of the fear syndrome, they're going to run away and then die a half a mile away. We won't find those carcasses. We only find the ones that actually die instantaneously. One of the most memorable in regards to like a deleterious action was a grow site about 2 years ago, where we're documenting and assessing a grow site for the Forest Service, and we're coming into this site, and then when we come into a dead animal, the first one was a gray fox that was dead, and then there was a turkey vulture that was actually embedded in that gray fox, that it took 1 bite and likely died. Turkey vultures, these are carrion eaters. They can eat dead animals. They can eat animals that have succumbed to different diseases and not be impacted by those diseases or pathogens, because they've developed immunity throughout the years and evolved with that. Now we have something that took probably 1 or maybe 1.5 bites and died. The other thing I noticed at that instance was there was a lot of flies trying to land on these carcasses that were decomposing, but yet there was no maggots. The flies that were landing were flying off, landing on me, and then dying instantaneously. So I documented it, collected some samples, then probably another half a mile away in another part of that complex, the exact same thing, but instead of a gray fox was a big black bear. It died while biting a tree because it's probably most likely convulsing, was suspected in the field, and a turkey vulture, again, embedded in it and died. If you look at this, this is a bear that just came in May 14th of this year, and so it's a beautiful shot. Here's all the trash, the food coming in there, and if I go ahead and if I go back through these photos, the other thing that's kind of surprising, unfortunately, there's also a bear here, and you can see that bear is coated with some type of white pesticide or fertilizer material. This may have been the bear that popped open that carbofuran bottle, and that was only 5 days ago, less than a week.
May 15th.
Yep. When we took those samples into the laboratory for further ancillary testing, all of those 4 carcasses came back positive for carbofuran, and what we suspected is that the growers were putting food at their marijuana cultivation site and contaminating it with carbofuran, and that's why the gray fox and the bear died, and then whatever consumed those, like the turkey vulture, died as well. So this says phosphorus de zinc, and you can see it says peligro, which means danger, and it says also hecho en Mexico. This is something that was made, and it's not for distribution at all in the United States, and you can clearly see that puncture wound right there. That is from either some large type of carnivore that has punctured this and has compromised this and either consumed it or popped into their mouth.
It's my understanding that a tremendous amount of this material is used, correct?
Oh yes, U.S. Forest Service finds these bottles at a lot of different sites, and they're distributed either on the plants, the soil, and the water. And so this is a significant environmental and human health risk.
Rainfall washes the growers' dangerous chemicals into the waterways. The chemicals also seep into the soil and can eventually make their way into the groundwater. These harmful compounds not only pollute water used by wildlife, but can ultimately end up in municipal water supplies.
If we go for private grows, some of the questions that we've been asking in other states that have legalized marijuana is you have these private grows that are highly fertigating their marijuana products with a lot of high rich nitrogen. Is that being conditioned to be either potable, non-potable water, but getting rid of the nitrification issues? And what we found out, like in Colorado, no, that just basically gets flushed into the municipality. So now you're having this potential high nitrogen fix that's coming into municipal water. Here in California, we have that, but we also have the trespass cultivation. The trespass cultivation water use is significant, where we're going off of the numerical values that actually the marijuana cultivators have provided us is 900 gallons per plant for a 150-day growing season. So when we look at just on United States Forest Service lands, just in 2017 was close to 1.5 million plants just removed off of California. And when we compile those numbers, that's about 1.1 to 1.2 billion gallons of water, which would be equivalent to 2 months of San Francisco's household use.
There's a lot of people that grow it on private property and that they don't think it affects the national forest, but we have some that's on private and they're pulling the water off of public lands, or it's half and half. It's on a fence line and some of it's on the national forest, some of it's on private property. We've had private landowners that have had wells go dry because of the marijuana growing, and then they start pulling the water off the forest as well.
We're talking now water theft off of our public lands that is being conducted without the agency that's stewarding our public lands permission, the public or policymakers' permission. So this is 100% theft and poaching, just like if it was poaching wildlife or other natural resources, it's equivalent. The other impacts is the erosion, and then we have the pesticides. Pesticides are not just even maliciously intending to poison wildlife, but the pesticides that are killing the insects that are damaging their marijuana plants. That's a pesticide there on the plants. The gross overspray on the soil, the next rain event, that soil percolates that pesticide into the waterways. You have salmon, amphibians that are living in that waterways. You have humans that are downstream. You have recreationists. You have families that are bringing their families out here to camp, to swim, and to utilize our public lands for what they're intended to. And now you have this threat layer that is being inundated into these natural resources that could potentially pose not just a human or an environmental health risk, but there's also that other impact of the accessibility of our public lands because of armed growers out in these forests.
I asked Dr. Gabriel about whether chemicals remain on the marijuana plants after they've been harvested and processed.
Now we've looked at recent literature, and there's been scientists that have looked at product that has been out on the market to be marketed as medicine for immunocompromised individuals. They've found fungal spores. In addition to that, they've found pesticides also present in a lot of these marketable products that have actually were purchased out of a store. So in addition to smoking, we're talking about concentrate. So when people concentrate it like hash or shatter or butter, these are all different types of concentrates of marijuana. That's taking the resin. A lot of the insecticides, specifically carbofuran, it's a systemic insecticide, which means that you place it on the plant, or you place it on the soil, or you place it in the water. It is then uptaken by the plant's xylem or phloem to be sequestered into the resin. So if it's contaminated and people are extracting that resin, the carbofuran will be impregnated into that resin. And if that's not being tested and then poured into an edible, because someone who may be immunocompromised cannot volatilize it or smoke it because it would be an irritant for their lungs. Let's just say you had lung cancer. You can't do that. You have to take an edible and concentrate. And if no one's testing that material, there's that potential mechanism of being exposed to those chemicals. And in addition to that would be also people are juicing. So people get marijuana, raw marijuana, juice it, extract it. Again, these are all potential mechanisms of getting that contaminated material into your system that carbofuran you shouldn't be ingesting in the first place.
I asked Dr. Gabriel about the expense associated with illegal marijuana cultivation and the ensuing land reclamation.
The financial impact is in the tens of thousands of dollars per site, and that's just the labor to get a site cleaned up. We bring aviation support that adds another layer, minimum per day between $8,000 to $15,000 per site. And then you're talking refuse. If you have hazardous material, add another several $1,000s to the hazardous material on that site. That's just to reclaim the land, just removing the infrastructure. Now, we're not even talking about the restoration, which could be tens of thousands of dollars in addition to that.
We were able to sit down with Captain Cody Wheeler of the U.S. Forest Service to discuss the extent of illegal marijuana cultivation on public land and its impact on law enforcement.
It's huge. Just in California, over the past 10 years, there's been over 3,700 grows. There are drug trafficking organizations on 72 national forests in 21 different states. In California alone, we spend from $1.2 to $2.3 million just on law enforcement for ourselves for marijuana each year. In addition to that, 1.2 million is given to our county cooperators that they can spend in assisting us. Every bottle of carbofuran that we prevent from going to the forest is a win, and really by the time we're out there, we're eradicating, we're reclamating, the damage is pretty much done.
I asked Captain Wheeler if any of California's forest fires could be traced back to these illegal marijuana grow sites.
We've had a handful of wildfires started by growers. We've had guys running from grows, lighting fires behind them. Either they're high on other drugs like maybe meth, but they're trying to get away from the grow. They think everybody's out to get them. We have intel that the growers have been taught to kick over the camp stove when we come to do the raid so that it starts a fire. And then we have the natural fires, or either lightning fire or other arson or man-caused fires that we're suppressing, that we will get called from the fire because they came across a grow site. And now we have firefighters trying to fight a fire, and it's next to all these marijuana plants and the chemicals, and then those chemicals are burning and you can't have people near that.
What we worry about as conservationists is, are we going to be here, someone else 150 years down the road from today, that our children's children are reaping the ramifications of the deleterious actions that have happened in our public lands? The poisoning of wildlife, the timber poaching, the water erosion, the contamination and exposure to these pesticides. Somebody who's sitting in let's say, Ohio, or someone sitting in Delaware is wondering, what does this mean to me that California is so contaminated? It's the fact that, one, is that a lot of these individuals are spending money making conscious decisions on shade-grown coffee, dolphin-safe tuna, sustainable purchase. But a lot of them don't even make those efforts for the marijuana that they're consuming. Their decisions may be actually, in turn, leading to contaminated water, poisoning to wildlife, and degradation of their public lands that is for them and their future generations as well.
Today's cleanup at Sierra National Forest demonstrates the labor-intensive and financially expensive effort needed to remove the trash and devastation left behind by just one of the thousands of illegal marijuana grow sites located on California's vast public land. These illegal marijuana growers are not just harmlessly growing marijuana. They are also using illegal and very dangerous pesticides, rodenticides, and insecticides which are harming our environment, poisoning our wildlife, and becoming a health risk for individuals. Marijuana is often perceived as harmless. However, as you've seen in this video, its cultivation can be detrimental to humans and the environment. Dr. Gabriel is available to speak to your organization, so for more information, please reach out to him via the National Marijuana Initiative. I'm Chris Wolf, and thank you for joining us.